I have this beautiful hand knit jumper, but it has a little bit of a problem. And today I want to take you along with me as I try to fix my knitting for the first time. At first glance, this jumper looks perfect. This is a jumper I drafted myself based on Petite Knit's zipper sweater. So it's a funnel neck, a half zip, oversized raglan pullover. And while I'm really happy with the way that it turned out, I made a little bit of an error when I was making it. Now, this is the first time I ever knit something using spit splicing. And as you can see, it's got a lot of color changes. All throughout this garment, instead of weaving in the ends, I held the two ends of the yarn together and I literally spat on them, or I dipped them in water and I rubbed them together to felt them. It was the first time I've ever done that in a project, and it worked really well. It meant I didn't have like hundreds of ends to weave in, but the problem is now, a year later, I've noticed it's actually started coming unraveled at a few of the joins, and there's two in particular that are really causing me worry. The first one's probably the worst, and that is underneath this left armpit hole. As you can see, something has happened where the brown and the grey yarn here that I cast on under the underarm has come undone. It hasn't been unraveling any further than this. It's been like this for about 6 months, but I am worried that when I wash it or I keep wearing it, it's gonna just totally come unraveled. Similarly, this piece has a split hem, and right here where the split hem is, there is another break in the yarn. So if you pull on these two pieces, they'd actually come apart. Those are both down the left-hand side. I don't think there's any issues, so I'll show you the right-hand side for comparison. This is what the good underarm looks like. There are still holes in my underarm. I think I just didn't quite pick these up right, but they're still all joined with the yarn. It's just like gappy. And this is the left-hand split hem. So that's how it should look. I have a little bit of free time today, so I thought I'd sit down and I'd actually try to either rejoin the ends of the yarn by pulling some fresh yarn out and doing a fresh spit splice and just doing it like a little bit better. I'm not sure if I just didn't do it enough. And if that's not feasible, I'm thinking I might try doing a duplicate stitch like darning repair. I've done that a couple of times on store-bought sweaters that have moth holes in them. And this is like a way thicker gauge, so this should be a breeze in comparison. So either way, I want to fix these holes before they get any worse, and hopefully level up my mending skills for the future. So the yarn I used for this project is really beautiful. It's Cascade Eco Cloud, and I am lucky enough to have some left over. This is a wool and alpaca blend chainette yarn, and I used two different colors. I think the colors were called Dove and Bunny, but it's actually an undyed yarn. So this is the natural wool and alpaca colors. It's kind of a warm pinkish brown and then a very neutral toned gray. I knew this before I had a YouTube channel, but it would have been such a good thing to talk about as I was making, because I had a lot of issues with this yarn. I bought this yarn secondhand, as I do most of my yarns, and I had about 600 grams, I think. And I thought that's plenty, you know, that's an extra 50% more than most of my jumpers take me. And as I was knitting, I got to about halfway down and I realized that was not going to be enough yarn. This is the heaviest thing I've ever made. I think this is about 800 grams. So for whatever reason, this yarn is very dense, and despite it being chainette, it's not a lot of yardage for how heavy it is. So I had to go online and find more of this discontinued yarn from somewhere, and I paid a lot of money to have it sent to me. And so I ordered a little bit more. I didn't want to order too much because it was so expensive. And so I actually had to figure out how to use all of the brown. So if you look really closely, you can see that the stripes on the arm, there are 4 full-size stripes, but on the body, there are only 3 full-size stripes and 1 half-width stripe. So hopefully you didn't notice that before I pointed it out to you. It doesn't cause me too much grief, but I truly used up all of the brown that I had. So that means I have a little bit of gray left over here. I'd say maybe like 50 grams. It's going to be plenty for me to do some darning with. And I think most of the issues can be concealed with gray yarn, so it's going to be fine. So let me lay this out on the ground and I'll get you a good view from the top down and we'll see what we can do about it. I think this is the best view we're going to be able to get. So I think let's start with the underarm, since that's the one that causes me the most worry that it's going to come apart. So So this is the gray strand and this is the brown strand. And these, I guess, were spit spliced together, but they've come apart. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try to ease out a little bit of extra yarn on both sides and then see if I can do a fresh spit splice. Okay, that's a bit of extra yarn on the grey side. Now this brown side. Yeah, I'm gonna pull yarn over from here. It's hard to know how much, like I wanna do enough so that I have like a good amount of grip, but I obviously don't want the armpit to be kind of puckered forever. Okay, all right. So that's 2 fresh bits of yarn. So what I think I'm gonna do is I'm going to cut just the tips off these to just get a little bit of fresh yarn and then try to spit splice it together again. So let me cut that fresh edge. And then when I spit splice this together, because it's chainette, usually I would pull the plies apart and then kind of weave them in together and then splice them. But you can't really do that with chainette. So I'm just going to have to wet them and see what we can do. And then let's weave them kind of around each other. And then it's usually a lot easier to do this because you're not having to kind of work amongst your existing knitting, but I think I've just got my pinky finger in there and I'm just going to rub it with the palm of my other hand. Excellent, it's starting to felt, look at that. So I think the problem was I stopped too early when I was doing the spit splicing for this project since I didn't really have much experience. So I'm going to keep going until I simply can't felt it any further. Oh, see, they've come apart again. Okay. Let me try to pull out some more yarn and see if we can get a little bit more. Yeah, see the end of that's all felted now, so I'm going to cut that off. This yarn is very feltable, which is great for spit splicing, but it means that even just wearing it, you know, for a few months has started to felt the fabric itself. So it's actually kind of hard to pull extra yarn through because it's all felted to its neighbors now. There we go. So let me cut that off. And I'm not certain that this felting is going to work. I think instead I'm going to do a little knot situation and try to use a knot and then weave through this yarn through to the other side and vice versa. So let's see if I can tie a knot to the yarn end. I hate to have knots in my knitting, but I'm not sure what else to do here to kind of like rescue this. Okay, so that's one knot. And now I can weave this through to kind of keep this end secure. So I'm going to weave it across to the right where the brown is, and then I'll pick up this brown and weave it across to the left. Okay, I just wove it 2 times. I'm going to do the other side and then I'm going to probably use the ends to come back and duplicate stitch over the top. So let's tie some yarn onto the brown side. And while I do this, I'm going to try to tuck these knots to the inside of the work as much as I can, so you can't really see them. And now I think I'm going to take the end of this yarn and I'm going to just try to weave back and forth a little bit over here in a bit of a faux stockinette stitch pattern, just to try to close up this gap and just make it a little bit less noticeable. Of course, it's going to interfere with this brown section, but I think that's okay. So I'm going to start in the top in the gray and then work my way down. I cut these strands a little bit short, so I'm finding it a bit hard to weave in. And when I have that problem, I just pull the yarn off the needle and then I do a couple of kind of in and out with my needle, and then I can thread the yarn through again. And I don't have to worry about whether my yarn is long enough to actually reach from the tip to the eye of the needle. And then I can just pull through. Okay, I think we might be getting as good as it's going to get. So I'm going to tuck these ends into the inside and then just kind of leave them hanging out there, and I'll show you our final result. Okay. So here's what we're looking like. I'm pretty happy. Obviously I wasn't able to do a perfect stockinette here because of the hole. It would have just taken me forever and ever to figure out exactly how to replicate it. And the grey now encroaches a little bit onto the brown, but this is as directly under the armpit as something can be, so it really isn't visible to anyone. And even if I pull on the yarn, there's no more hole there. So that's a huge win. I'm really happy about that. So here's a close-up of what we're working with down here. It's a very similar situation. You can see there's a grey yarn tail here, which I can pull through. And I assume there's a brown yarn tail in here somewhere that's come undone, but I can't actually see it. And like I said, this yarn has started to just felt from general wear and tear, so it's a little tricky to see the ends. So I wonder where, I would assume it would be here on this row. There we go. We have a drop stitch here too to contend with. Just here. It's also felted that I really don't think there's a huge risk of it actually coming undone, but either way, I do want to kind of capture that in my repair. So I have to pick up a ladder and bring it back up. And this is the stitch that I need to capture. And my 2 yarn ends. So I'll leave that needle there just to hold that stitch in place. Let's see how much yarn we can reclaim on either side. There's actually quite a bit on this side. The problem here is that it's all felted to its friends. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to get much more. I think what I'll do is I will feed the brown yarn through this drop stitch, which is kind of how it was before. It was really hard to see. It was all felted together, but that's kind of, I pulled the brown yarn out of there, so maybe it's supposed to be in there. So let me pull that through. And now that stitch is secure. And I think, what's the best way to do this? If we tie a knot, I'll still have these ends to deal with. How's that gonna look? That's gonna look pretty average. Do I need to tie a knot there? Let me compare it to the other side. This is the other side, and there's actually quite a big gap here kind of naturally. Nothing's dropped here. So I think there's supposed to be this kind of gap. And I think these ends could actually probably just happily be woven in to their counterparts. So let me do that. Maybe there wasn't too much to be fixed here. Again, these are so short. I'm going to just weave my needle through a couple of stitches like so. And then pull it as close as I can to the eye, feed the yarn through, and then kind of slide the stitches off my needle one by one. It's tough because this is a chunky yarn, so I need to use a big needle, but that needle's really tight to fit through these stitches. There we go. The problem is when I pull on this, the yarn wants to become unwound. So I might have to do the same thing I did last time and just give it a little bit of extra length. So let me attach some extra length here. Like that. That will also discourage it from coming apart. And then we can weave in this long end in a minute. Okay, let's do the same kind of thing. I'm going to tuck this brown yarn in along this other edge. I'll try to tuck it behind a little more just because it's not the same color as the hem. I don't really want it to be super visible from the front side. Okay. And again, I'm just gonna do a little hair extension on this one. And I'm just gonna weave these long ends all the way up the edge of the split hem and kind of tuck it in at the back. And hopefully that will just reduce any risk that this is all going to fall apart. As you can see, I'm pretty relaxed when it comes to weaving in my ends. I don't really have a rhyme or reason. I've learned how to do a duplicate stitch and reverse duplicate stitch, which is the best way. But it's quite hard on ribbing, so I'd like to kind of go up a column of a rib. And when I cut the end, I'm going to leave a fair bit over because as you pull on it, that end's going to tuck itself in naturally. I am, however, going to try to weave in this little knot. Maybe kind of crossways, like so. Okay, so now if I trim some of these ends, give them a tug. That's the inside and that's the outside. All right, let's tidy up this one and then we're all done. Okay, there's the final result for the split hem. Much, much better. I've managed to pick up whatever that drop stitch was and there's no more loose little thread poking out. So hopefully that's a bit more secure now. Okay, so in about 30 minutes I was able to fix something that's been bothering me for a few months. So let that be a lesson to you. If you've been putting something off for a few months that'll take you no time at all to fix, go ahead and do it. I'm very glad that my jumper is now a lot more safe from future damage. It actually looks better than I thought. Hopefully it will last me many, many more years of wearing to come. It's a shame I had to tie a knot in the end. I hate the feeling of knots in my knitting and I really wanted to make do with the felting, but there just wasn't enough yarn left over, and since this yarn has already started to felt together, it just was really resistant to felting anymore. So I'm still very glad with the repair that I was able to do, and I think it's perfectly functional and no one is ever going to be able to see this one. So thanks for hanging out with me. I hope you have fun watching me repair this jumper. I hope if you have any knits you need to repair that maybe you got them done along the way too. And let me know, do you have anything else sitting in your wardrobe that you know you could fix in like 5 minutes and you haven't done it yet? I'd love to know that I'm not alone. Until next time, happy knitting.